Welcome back. Another episode of UAP Studies podcast. Today is actually, I think it's May 5th of 2024.
May the 5th be with you.
May the 5th be with you. I know they tried a whole fourth thing. A lot of cheesy May the 4th be with you stuff happened yesterday. A lot of cringeworthy stuff. So, not everybody should jump on board with the May this, some people aren't Star Wars people and shouldn't do it. That's all I'm saying.
I'm not a Star Wars person, so I'm probably cringing.
The original trilogy. Yeah, the original trilogy is my favorite. Before George Lucas messed it up, before Disney got involved and just rehashed the same story. Their shows are good, but their movies are crap. I think they should slow down on the movies.
But today we're done with Cinco de Mayo today, right?
That's true. That's true. And at the end of this month, we're heading out to Contact in the Desert. Hopefully we're still, good to go on that, but that's what we're aiming for. It's going to be a fantastic event and a big event. So if you're interested in studying, listening to conferences, I think it's 5 days of conference, 3 days, 4 days. Yeah, it's going to be epic. And so if you guys see us out there, come and say hello to Michael and us. I think we're both bringing our spouses as well. So you'll say hi to the missus too. And, but I'm really excited about today's guest. So today we have Bruce Rapuano. Hopefully I said that correctly. Of course, he's joining us today. And Bruce reached out to us a while back and just sent me a link to his book. It said, hey, this is out. And when I contacted him again, Michael, he's like, yeah, sure, I'll send you the book. And I got the book within 2 days.
How do you always get the books?
It's just, yeah, right. I think it's the collection behind me sort of entices it. Yeah. We'll work on your library in the back. We'll just make it a wall full of books, right?
The other wall across from here is full, but yeah,
that's the angle should use
with book impoverished so that people will send.
But this book was good, and I like having an actual book in my hands as opposed to some people are good on e-readers. I'm not.
Physical object is vastly superior.
Plus, I tab and highlight all the sections of my books. There no resale value at all, Bruce, in any of the books that I get because they're highlighted and notes and everything in there.
Right until the people are collecting Jason Guillemette.
That might be a thing. I kicked a bucket. My wife sells the collection of books. Might be worth something, right?
There you go.
And then people go, he was an idiot. Did you see what he scribbled in there? He's not as good as we thought he was. Yeah. But Bruce joins us today, Michael. And he's had experiences since he was a kid and predating the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case.
Incredible. He was 1961, right?
Betty and Barney. That's correct. And he predates that with his experiences as a kid. What is great in this book and is there's some, the blips happen where all of a sudden you're somewhere doing something and you don't know how you got there. You don't even know how it resolves, but it's a blip, it's a memory, and he's had a lot of those throughout his life. Now, we're going to get Bruce to talk to us about his career, what he did, what he does for a living, what he did for a living, because it gives credibility to what happened to him. In the past, people always thought
that he's not insane, right?
Well, yeah, he's established he's not insane, and even he sent me the abridged version, which all his data, all the science, obviously being an academic, I mean, everything's there. And it's hard to come back to somebody and say, well, actually, what about this? No, he's already covered it, which is nice. But for a long time, a lot of people thought that abductees were some farmer in a field or some crazy nut job, because that was what was being told to us by the media.
I used to think that. I personally used to think that all UAPs were mundane objects that had been sort of misperceived by normal people, and that the very few people out there who claim to have had up close or really high resolution encounters with these things must have some sort of mental illness. I never read anything about the topic. That's just was my automatic assumption about this until I actually started reading books by people who were collecting encounters, and you realize that there's a whole world of totally apparently sane, functional, otherwise normal people who've had these experiences, and there's nothing that unites them other than the fact that they've had these experiences, which is just sort of ontologically shocking to a lot of people, including me a few years ago. So I'm with you. Yeah.
And it's amazing too. there's a lot of these people are people that we rely on a daily basis. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're judges, actors, politicians. We now know people within the Department of Defense,
Yeah.
people with the CIA. Man, everybody's experiencing this. It doesn't matter who you are, where you live. It's irrelevant. If you're chosen, you're chosen. But it's no different here with Bruce because, and we'll get into Bruce's experience. And Bruce, I want to welcome you to UAP Studies podcast, and I thank you so much for reaching out to us and being a guest on our episode today, which is, to me, it's very near and dear to my heart. People know that the abduction phenomenon is my main focus, but with Michael by my side, we get to delve into all types of different things, which is great because it opens up my mind too. So, welcome to UAP Studies podcast,
Welcome,
my man.
Bruce. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to not just to be on the podcast, but to meet both you, Jason, and you, Michael. It,
yeah, us as well, man.
I call us fellow travelers because we both have developed, I feel already, the same passion based on our experiences and the people we've talked to and the things we've read about. So it's great to meet you both.
Same. So tell us about yourself professionally. What is your professional background?
So as I started mentioning a couple minutes ago offline, I majored in neurobiology and minored in psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. Became very interested as a college student in the function of the brain. So then after that, got my neuropharmacology Ph.D. at the University of Connecticut. And in a couple of years, I was working at what at the time was probably the top cancer hospital research center in the U.S., Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan. And after that, for pretty much my entire career, worked as a cell biologist in a related field. It wasn't cancer, but I worked in metabolic bone disease area, where I tried to develop the next generation of orthopedic implants, artificial knees, artificial hips. And in my spare time, because a lot of people in my family were lawyers, I actually went to law school. Didn't practice, but was fascinated by the study of law and what the legal mind was all about, and whether or not it could help me in my scientific career. But in the end, I was much more in love with being a scientist than being a lawyer, so I never practiced law. But as I say, I've worked in a number of areas in cell biology, but mainly in the study of metabolic bone diseases. And that's essentially my academic background. Published about 30 papers, scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, and I had a lot of fun doing scientific research. But then somewhere along the road, I realized I had these strange experiences that I never knew how to explain until the mid 80s, when a lot of great books by some great UFO abduction investigators were written, and I kind of connected the dots and realized that I could check all the boxes on what I call the core alien abduction scenario, and everything that happened to the people that claimed they were abductees, just about it happened to me. So that's basically getting to the next point, which anticipating we're going to get to, is why I wrote the book Dominion Lost.
Well, that's the thing that I liked about the book, is that basically you're saying, you're a scientist. Like, you study the human brain, you understand how the human brain thinks and the processes. But what's interesting about this is that you're now saying also, I'm also an experiencer of something I can't solve, which as a scientist I think would be maddening. As somebody who thinks all the time, like, how does this fit into what I know about psychology, or about how the brain works, or about how the body works? Like, it makes no sense. And there's you could almost hear it's not a struggle, but you could hear the divisive sort of mindset, like between well, look, this happened scientifically. Here's the research that I've done to prove that this has happened to other people. But also get a sense that it's an emotional one for you as well, because you could write it on paper as best as you can, but you can never transfer the emotions and the feelings you were having at the time, the fear and all that. You could say, I was fearful, but to give us the actual experience of what kind of fear you were experiencing, you can't. So I love that. So we're going to get into this right now. So explain to us where you grew up, so your family dynamics, and then your first recount of your first experience with something not normal.
Well, I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and that's the home of Yale University. A number of people in my family attended that university.
I was just there last week.
Oh yeah, I think you mentioned that. Yeah,
I
yeah.
got locked in a courtyard in the library by accident.
Yeah, if you can get through the protesters, but it's a great college town, I call it, and I I had pretty normal childhood. We like to go to the beach every week in the summertime, but ha, you know what I say in the book is that it's funny how the experiences from your life that you tend to remember every detail of that, that you could remember years and decades later, the experiences that made the greatest impressions. And it seemed like all the experiences that I can recall detail after detail are these strange encounters with, small 3.5 to 4 foot tall humanoid beings. But the first experience I can recall is, I was just in my bed at night, and this was in 1961. I think it was Michael who mentioned that, and I think both Jason also mentioned this was actually a couple months before the Betty and Barney Hill abduction in the summertime of 1961, probably late June or late July. It was a warm night. Mother had kept the window open, and I'm just lying in bed, maybe just before dusk. I look out and I see through the open bedroom window the strangest looking airplane I'd ever seen in my life. Even in the waning sunlight, it was reflecting the sun so intensely, like it was a highly polished metallic surface. But yet the fuselage looked a little bit in diameter greater than I would expect based on its length. It looked more roundish. I thought I saw wings, but again, it was just such a strange looking airplane flying silently over the rooftops of our neighborhood, maybe 5 or 6 blocks from where we were. And ordinarily I would have been incredibly fascinated to watch this aircraft. I was fascinated by any helicopter, airplane, or jet I could see overhead from the youngest age. Did something very strange. I turned my head away from it and went to sleep, which was very uncharacteristic because I was a very curious child. And I wake up, and when I wake up, I'm no longer in my bedroom. I'm in some other room that looks like a very clinical environment, like a hospital. And I'm lying on a table. The table feels hard to the touch. I can't really tell what it's made out of, but it looks like a table that's too long or too wide to be a table for a child. But again, it looks like it feels like an examination table in a hospital. I sense some commotion in front of me, and I sit up, and I'm just astonished by what I see. In front of me, maybe 20 feet from the foot of the table, I see dozens of what I call humanoid, lack of a better word, alien beings. Again, they're 3.5 to 4 foot tall, the classic gray alien, but they look white in color, all with disproportionately large, hairless heads. All look like clones of one another. I even have the question in my mind, for some reason, a childish question: are they all boys? Are they all girls? And almost as if some non-human intelligence was eavesdropping on my internal dialogue, I seemed to get the answer, seemed to be made to understand that yes, both sexes were represented in that group of dozens of humanoids that were walking in both directions. And I think at this point, I'll stop my account. I'll stop telling my account because I'm anticipating there's going to be one or more questions about this particular experience.
Michael, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question. I mean, one thing that I love about you recounting this experience is first that you've had sufficient medical training to be able to ask the questions about whether this is a sort of vestige of psychological trauma that you might have had. I mean, there's psychological sort of reinterpretations of abduction or encounter experiences that call them screen memories or use some kind of Freudian language to write them off. I assume that you are, well acquainted enough with the way the human psyche works to have thought about those questions. And what are your thoughts about that?
The most common explanation for these abduction experiences, at least as offered by clinical psychologists, is sleep paralysis. This is just one. This is one experience. I've had another where I was asleep at the time, but I've had other experiences that had multiple witnesses, where there was sighting of UFOs, close encounters cited by multiple witnesses, other physical evidence, strange medical symptoms, scars found in my nasopharynx. But I'll get back to your question to answer it directly. The explanation that's most commonly offered for these abduction experiences, sleep paralysis, many cases, and abduction investigators, particularly Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, has written about this. In many of those cases, there's a known medical cause or psychological cause for the sleep paralysis. 20 or 30% of people have at least one isolated episode of sleep paralysis. Quite, fewer have, what's called recurrent sleep paralysis, which has a number of medical causes, and the most prominent psychological cause would be post-traumatic stress disorder. But in every cause of sleep paralysis, whether it's a medical cause or a psychological cause, the common denominator, the final proximate cause of the sleep paralysis, is interruption of sleep. If you have to have interruption of sleep to predispose to this recurrent condition of sleep paralysis.
And that's some environmental.
In my case, I can't identify any. I can't identify. I slept as a baby, as a child, as an adult. I slept like a baby. I never had anything in terms of overactive imagination that would cause me to lose sleep. Any type of anxiety during my childhood, teen, adult years that would cause me to lose sleep. Had no medical cause that I some of the medical causes I delineate in the book for the sleep paralysis that would lead to an interruption of sleep. And this has also been the same type of analysis that abduction investigators have made, principally Dr. John Mack, that, where there's known cause of sleep paralysis and, multiple witnesses to an incident, a UFO close encounter that culminates in an abduction, or physical evidence, that it's kind of a red herring and it's something that, at least I'm confident in my case, I can eliminate as an issue that might complicate my evaluation analysis of what happened.
So, it might be fair to say then that if you were forced to explain your experience in terms of some known medical explanation, sleep paralysis is the thing that you would really begrudgingly have to point to. But in truth, there is no medical sort of.
That would be my least favorite and least scientifically supported alternative hypothesis. Scientists, we also always have to consider alternative hypotheses, involvement of government agencies, purely psychological phenomenon, strange aspects of the collective unconscious. But by far,
so you're a Jungian. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, but by far the model of alien abduction, I think, it fits the details of my experiences in their totality the best.
Absolutely.
And that's the conclusion I put forth in my book.
And if I may say, what is fascinating about this is if it was sleep paralysis, you would not have felt the table on your back. You probably wouldn't have seen the visuals. Like if it was a brightly lit room that you
Yes.
were in, right?
Yes. Yes.
There's no way that sleep paralysis, usually you're in your room, you're aware that you can't move in your room. But in your instance, you're in a different environment altogether from your room.
And
And
I
why?
wasn't paralyzed
And you were
at that point.
paralyzed, right? Or
Recall
just
distinctly. I'll just
You sat
touch
up. Yeah.
sitting up because I sensed a commotion in front of me, and then after I had my opportunity to see what was going on in front of me, felt what I thought was a hand that was probably as large as my thorax and abdomen gently pushed me back down on the table. And, I thought it was a hand of a being that was probably larger than, again, the 3.5 to 4 foot tall beings I saw in front of me, that was forcing me or pushing me back down the table, after which I went to sleep. So, that's, again, those are, as you said, Jason, those are, provide other details that do not support this theory of sleep paralysis.
Yeah, I've never
remember?
heard of. I'm sorry, I've just never heard of a case of verified sleep paralysis or like sleep paralysis case studies where the sense of paralysis was not a part of it, where a person was like, "Oh, I had sleep paralysis, but I felt that I could sit up and do all these things." I mean, the sense of being paralyzed is like a necessary component of it. I think.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was going to ask you, do you remember or recall any smells?
Yeah, God, that's funny because I'm thinking of Whitley Strieber saying that he did detect some smell of the alien. I think he asked one of the tall grays if he could smell the alien, and I never detected any aroma. I even had an encounter where a gray, same anatomical appearance, with the same anatomical appearance as the beings I saw when I was 6 years old. This was several years later, was standing at the foot of my bed within 1 to 2 feet of me, and I didn't detect any odor at all.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always ask that because obviously smell is the closest thing to our memory. And if you could trigger that, like if you smelled something, you're like, oh, uh,
Right.
just for instance, I hate the
Sense
smell
memory.
of the oven cleaner, that spray for
Mm-hmm.
your
Oh,
oven
yeah.
cleaner. I despise that smell. It's the worst smell
Me
in the
too.
world. I cannot tolerate that. And I don't even I haven't smelled it in like 27 years, but I could still recall that smell. And because it's linked to my memory, I hated it so much. And this is what I ask people, because if we could sort of narrow it down, um, at least a smell, like what would lead to that smell, of course. The
Yeah.
other thing that
Olfaction is such a neglected sense too. I mean, we'll talk about what we heard and what we saw and what we touched or whatever, but we just almost pretend like we don't have it as a sense or something. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, but you make a very valid point. Smell is something that is never described, even when you read books. Like they say what they hear or what they taste, but never what they smell. And I think if you're able to incorporate, like, look, a smell would really solidify your position. At least it does for me. I like, if I like lighting incense in this office here when I do recordings, because it calms me, it soothes me. It's a powerful sense that I think in ufology we don't ask enough. We know that some vessels have sort of like an ionized smell to it, but what about once you're inside the ship? What does the ship smell like? If it was me, I'd be sniffing the tables and all the instruments. Like,
you could write a sensory history of UAP abductions or something. Like
yeah, that's why they don't. That's why they don't come pick me up. They're like, this guy's too weird, man. he's a table sniffer. Let's not get him again. But Bruce, you mentioned something really cool about these little entities, and we'll get to the other parts, of course, of your abductions. But the outer layer, and people keep talking about this, that the outer layer seems to be some sort of protection for the entities. Even talking to Susan
Like
Alloway,
skin,
Michael.
like of like a gray being's sort of
Yeah, there's
dermal.
like a layer. Like people always say, there's like a thin layer that protects them. Like even Susan Alloway mentioned it, that it was sort of like a squishy jelly, just outer
Oh,
layer.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it could be that protects them from the environment or from viruses that we may have, or even vice versa, protecting us from having that. But Bruce, I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I'm sure both of you have seen the movie Fire in the Sky about the Travis Walton abduction. Tracy Torme had written the screenplay. I remember that scene near the end of the movie where you can see he sees the alien beings without their suit, the gray suit, but then you can see them hanging somewhere inside the spacecraft. And it's amazing that the number of people, number of abductees that have claimed, even though the grays have this gray appearance, that they had some feeling that it looked like it wasn't a natural skin. It was either some type of a fabric or a one-piece suit that was silver in color or gray in color. And other abductees like myself did not see the small humanoids with the gray or silver color, but they're actually white in appearance. And so that leads a lot of abduction investigators to speculate that there is some type of a biomechanical suit that the grays wear. Now, that brings me to the day after Roswell, where Lieutenant Colonel
Philip
Corso had mentioned that the pathologists at Walter Reed Hospital were very familiar with the gray suit because they were able to cut through it with I believe, was a diamond saw and indicate that it was composed of interwoven fibers, very strong but very flexible. And Philip Corso claims that the material in that suit was the basis for Kevlar.
Yeah.
That it was reverse engineered, and that's how police have their protective vest, because of the biomechanical suit that was reverse engineered by the scientist that Philip Corso had given the information to. And in the book, I speculate that one of the functions of the suit, besides its protective function, might be because there's some evidence that, because the fact that the grays that were dissected at Walter Reed Hospital had no reproductive system, no digestive system, had a skin that was very permeable, suggesting to the pathologist at Walter Reed that perhaps the grays obtained nutrition through the skin. I theorize in the book that there also is additional function of the suit, and that is that there may be some interior nanostructuring to the suit that can activate pores in the skin to open and close by turning on specific genes, by some type of transmission of biomechanical information that allows the skin to absorb nutrients. There's some corroboration of that. One of David Jacobs' books describes, and also Dr. John Mack's books describes, abductees seeing alien beings in tanks containing liquid, and the liquid was removed, and the alien beings walked out of the tanks. And when the abductee asked the aliens what the purpose of what they saw was, the abductee was told that's how we obtain nutrition. And so I beyond that, I don't think I deal with any other functions of this, a number of investigators called the biomechanical suits that the grays wear that give them the gray color. But we have to account for why sometimes beings with the same anatomical appearance appear white in color, and other times they appear gray or to have a silvery color. And that's been the explanation, that they're wearing some type of suit with a number of functions that we haven't discerned yet.
And you think that's the most likely explanation?
Oh yes, well, I mean, if you believe Philip Corso's story, it certainly it would serve a protective function because the pathology reports that were very detailed that Corso read in, I think in 61 had mentioned that very detailed explanations of how the suits were constructed. So
Phil Corso was like head of Army scientific research and development.
Yes, Army research and development for foreign foreign technology. So he was head of the Office of Foreign Technology. So he was a good candidate to be, the one person who was going to receive the materials received from the crash site at Roswell for disseminating to private industry for potential reverse engineering.
What blows my mind is the fact that these things don't have sexual organs. You mentioned no digestive tract, which either means that they've been genetically modified that way, because you can't just spring up out of nowhere, or they're droids of some kind. And even when you're mentioning the tanks, it makes sense. If you're out and about in different atmospheres, different pressures, you're under the ocean, in space, in our air, you need to be able to charge up, because these things are active 24/7. We always assume that, oh, there was a sighting here. No, there's sightings every day. Whether we see them or not, they're always active. And to be active like that 24/7, you need to be able to feed yourself or to sustain whatever operations you're on. So the tanks, I thought, you mentioned that it might be a way they eat, was refreshing. I haven't heard that one before. And you mentioned also the abductees that get, sperm taken, women get impregnated for 3 months, the fetus is then removed, they put them in tanks right away. So again, the tanks tend to pop up quite a bit, but they're not in every single vessel, though.
Those are like John Mack stories, right? Those are like people having pregnancies that are then just
that's still, yeah, that I haven't heard anything in the last 10 years, really. I'm sure it's still happening, but yeah, I haven't heard
missing fetus syndrome, probably one of the most common experiences for female abductees is the missing fetus syndrome. And I think abductees have also been told that the liquid inside we call incubators, that the alien human hybrid fetuses are seen in also serves the purpose of nutrition. In another case, an abductee had seen a gray paint some type of liquid on the skin of a infant hybrid, and was told that was also for the purpose of feeding of nutrition. So there are a number of cases. I found it such as a striking parallel between what Corso had reported on from his reading of the Walter Reed pathology reports, that the skin was an avenue of nutrition, and finding that corroborated by the reports of the abductees that were told the very same thing by the aliens who abducted them. So I thought that was a very interesting parallel between those two bodies of research.
Yeah, you also mentioned about the mouth, how it's mostly just a slit, and it appears to be useless because they speak telepathically. They don't eat through their mouth. But that, to me, wouldn't that be an indication of, at one point they needed it? They've, moved past the point of needing a mouth. So would that sort of indicate engineering? Like
their jaws are smaller, their mouth is smaller, they don't have the masticatory muscle development. And that would probably suggest that, if you believe in what's called the expensive tissue hypothesis, well, if you knock out an organ system like the reproductive system or the digestive system, the energy requirements are decreased, and more energy is available from the nutrition that they get through the skin for cerebral activity, for brain activity. That's a number of scientists have talked about that theory with respect to our early hominid ancestors, that some of the organ systems or some tissues in the body were reduced in size, and that allowed the brain to develop because due to dietary restrictions, during for our early hominid ancestors a million years ago, it was not always easy to get enough food to sustain activity in all of the tissues, and sometimes that resulted in not enough energy for the brain, which required the most energy per gram of tissue. So, I think that's one theory that kind of resonates with the idea that the Greys were genetically engineered, so that to permit the development of the brain, they have these large brains, and that would be the explanation for that.
This also sort of falls along the lines of some of the ideas that Michael Masters has in his book, the Extraterrestrial model. I think there's another book where he talks about these things, where he sort of theorizes that the kind of standard gray alien sort of morphology that you see is it makes some sense given the trajectory of human evolution so far, as that they would minimize certain muscle groups and physical characteristics in order to like make more room or more energy for like the cranial space and brain tissue and things. So if you just roll human evolution forward, you get something sort of like these creatures: shorter, larger brains, smaller jaws.
Yeah. And and even we're talking about the different descriptions, like some are tall, some we call them brown grays because they're more brown in color or just odd. And this is just a thought theory. I'm not saying this is real, but if these little buggers have been active for millennia or, millions of years, whatever planet they're occupying or working on, that planet would have effects over time on their biology. Same as if we send people to Mars, they'll have a smaller density of bones because there's not as much gravity. So over time, it changes and morphs the entity. They might be the same species, but they change due to conditions, right?
Might have to be engineered to do that. I mean, it might not be that you get to a certain point of technological development and you just don't need to have a body in the normal way that we think about it. I mean, you might not be confined to one sort of incarnate form, right? You might be able to kind of transfer yourself into other embodiments that are better suited for different environments or different purposes or something. So I always think that maybe you're not seeing just a being in a suit, maybe you're seeing a being in a body in a suit or something.
Yeah, like a Russian doll type idea, right? Yeah.
Homunculus in the very end of it.
Yeah.
And Bruce, what are your thoughts on that?
My idea is that the Greys, as other investigators have mentioned, were genetically altered for a purpose, to serve a specific function, to act as a servant or worker drone for some master species. And I think it's very the rationale for the types of genetic alterations were made is very, very practical. That the beings were all cloned from the same initial being, and there was no purpose for them to have a reproductive system because they're just clones of each other. And it's very practical and efficient and cost efficient for them to get their nutrition through the skin. So that they were just genetically engineered for a specific purpose and function, which is in my opinion, is to act as technicians for some master species. They're the principal investigators that are experimenting on human beings for some purpose that we really don't understand. And so I think it's a practical solution to a problem that some dominant species had. And how do we most efficiently, conduct these experiments on Homo sapiens, this reproductive program where we're trying to alter the human genome for whatever purpose. And, and they have, for some reason, decided to use corporeal biological beings instead of robots to assist them in this particular enterprise.
So you're using the word species
designed for that purpose.
Yeah. So you're not using the word species in the sense that we would normally think of it. They're not like an independently evolved organism that can like breed on their own and reproduce. They're a kind of biological tool that has some sort of like autonomy or agency.
Right. I even go further than that by speculating that, as the ancient alien theorists say, that these ETs or aliens or interdimensionals have been visiting our planet for millions of years, and the Greys may have been genetically engineered from our early hominin ancestors. Coincidentally, Homo habilis, who lived, one of our ancestors that lived 1 million to 2 million years ago, was also 3.5 to 4 foot tall. Mm. So what I speculate is that perhaps that the Greys were genetically engineered from that particular hominin, and those are the beings that the abductees most commonly interact with, and they're just really assistants, technicians, because they don't seem to have any individual personality or anything that would indicate that they are able to perform any function other than a basic technician type of a function.
Sure.
Well, they're very practical. Yeah.
All these fascinating questions just from one story. So how did that story end? And like, what is the next encounter that you have? So you had this guy or this being put a hand on your chest and sort of lay you back down, and that was the end of it. And if so, what's the next?
And then I woke up, and that was the next morning, and I didn't know what had happened to me, except that I thought those are I don't know why I thought they were doctors. I thought I'd been in a hospital. I don't know why I was in a hospital, but had the feeling, I keep bringing up other work. I remember Whitney Strieber had mentioned in one of his books, it might have been Transformation, his son had also been abducted and claimed that he was taken by the little doctors, the little blue doctors. I call them the little white doctors. And for months after that, actually months before that, I had a series of ear infections, very painful. And after the abduction, they returned, and that was in the late summer, and the ear infections had returned in the early to late fall, but they were milder than they had been earlier in the year. And the experience I described of being in that clinical setting, that alien clinical setting, hospital, was so real to me. I had thought that I had had some type of procedure to treat my ear infections, and that's why they were milder in the late fall. After that summer abduction experience, and so that's how that experience had affected me. It was so real that I really felt I had some procedure in a hospital. But it was strangest type of hospital. I didn't know if it was an army or hospital, but something was, as a child, continued to be very real for me for a number of months and years afterward.
How old were you with that first experience?
6.
6 years old.
6 years old. Again, that's the most common age where when abductees can recall their first experience.
Yeah, and something else that you mentioned in the book is nosebleeds, which is very typical and very common in children that are abductees. They get some sort of tampering or something like that happens in the nose, And your grandfather had an interesting case as well that might be linked to it, but maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the nasal chapters in your book.
Well, it's such a common thing. 10 to 20% of abductees report during the abduction, when they're on the table, that proverbial table inside the UFO, that they have had some type of device inserted into their head, whether it's in the ear canal, behind the ear, under the eye, or most often inside the nasal cavity. And all of the abductees that have that particular experience of having these implants in the nasal cavity also complain of unexplained nosebleeds. In my case, I had a missing time experience where I was alone in the apartment. I was 6 years also 6 years old at the time. This was kind of late in the year, and I did not know what I'd been doing that day. I had an experience where I felt I was standing against the wall of the apartment, felt wetness under each nostril, and then I heard a voice inside my head tell me, "Don't let them see the blood." I didn't even know I was bleeding. And sure enough, I ran several steps to the bathroom, was horrified to see that, in fact, blood was streaming down from both nostrils, had reached my chin, took some water and washed it off. And a number of abductees have reported the same experience. And I draw the parallel between my case and a couple of cases that were discussed by Bud Hopkins, the groundbreaking abduction investigator, where not only did the child at the same age report an abduction, have an unexplained nosebleed, but also was examined by two physicians that found strange scar in the back of the throat behind the nose, the nasopharynx, that indicated there'd been some type of probe or a medical instrument inserted inside the nasal cavity. Now, interestingly enough, that also happened to me when I had my adenoids and tonsils removed. The ENT also found the same type of scar. I asked my father about it, and my dad had asked me, did you put in anything inside your nose? And I said no. And again, it's the same exact set of circumstances that has been reported in the abduction literature. Interestingly enough, the nasal cavity is also used as a route for resections of pituitary tumors by human neurosurgeons. Now, the route is through an air sinus behind the nasal cavity called the sphenoid sinus. And that's the route that neurosurgeons take to remove pituitary tumors. Right next to that, separated by a very thin amount of bone, which can also be porous at times, is the cavernous sinus, which is a blood sinus. Now, the cavernous sinus is a route for, if there's an infection in the sphenoid sinus, is a route for transmission of bacterial infections to the meninges of the brain. In fact, it's very uncommon to have meningitis from uncomplicated infection in the sphenoid sinus, but it's much more common to have an infection spread to the meninges after pituitary surgery. And because it's such a direct route of transmission from, as I say, from the air sinus, the sphenoid sinus, to the cavernous sinus. Well, in fact, my grandfather, and at the time I heard about this, I couldn't believe it. He had had a blood clot, an infection in the cavernous blood sinus that did result in meningitis and took his life at the age of 42. And I never believed it at the time. It was such a rare medical condition could lead to someone losing their life. And in fact, when I did research for the book, I found out that the chances of having cavernous sinus thrombosis and infection was something like 1 in 19 million. So the time my grandfather died, he was one of 5 or 6 people in the country that had a meningitis from this particular medical condition that, again, as I mentioned, took his life. And what I describe in the book is that any type of medical intervention involving insertion of a medical instrument through the nasal cavity is much more likely to cause this condition of cavernous sinus thrombosis.
Is it something that needs to happen recently, or can a history of having something inserted in there, or maybe scarification or whatever, lead to this condition, or does it something that needs to have tampered with it recently?
It's resulting of the introduction of some type of a sharp instrument probe into really a septic environment where there's a lot of bacteria that can be easily transferred into this sphenoid sinus. So, the fact that meningitis occurs 1 in every million cases, but after pituitary surgery, the incidence can be as high as 1 to 5% of all surgical procedures, indicates that that's a much more likely way of getting an infection moving from the sphenoid sinus to the cavernous sinus, and then ultimately that's the most common route for it to spread to the meninges of the brain, which can be fatal.
So if somebody has meningitis in the cavernous sinus,
that's how it gets to the meninges.
Probably because something went in there. It's not just like some spontaneous freak thing.
Because it's so rare, but much more likely to happen after this type of medical procedure. So I speculate that, as I say, in my case, I check all the boxes for the core alien abduction scenario. 10 to 20% of people who are abducted have this type of implant procedure through the nasal cavity. I can remember distinctly at the age of 6 that it's something like a BB with studs or projections on the surface of it, 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter, had come out of my nose. So I know I had this type of implant.
From the bleeding? You mean when your nose started bleeding, this thing came out? Or
no, I had the memory of it.
Okay.
All right. In other words, I had a recall. I never found it. I could never realize why I had this particular memory, again at the age of 6 years old. But so if I believe that I was an abductee, which I have a lot of evidence to support that happened to me, I know I can remember an implant. It came out of my nasal cavity with a very specific structure. And a number of abduction investigators have provided evidence that this is this abduction phenomenon is multi-generational in nature. It's much more likely for your children to be abducted. If you're abducted, it's much more likely for you to be abducted if one of your parents was abducted. Then that's the rationale for why I speculate that if all these things happened to me, that it was much more likely that my grandfather died as a result of a medical procedure that was performed on him by non-human doctors
who botched
took his life, rather than he was one person in 19 million that had this uncomplicated sinus infection that caused his meningitis. So that's basically what I describe in one of the chapters in my book.
And so you're experiencing these nosebleeds and these blips in your life. You kind of know something's going on. You can't quite narrow it down. You do mention in the book that you have a brother, and I'm just curious about your brother and your dad. Did you ever approach them about this and ask them if they themselves were experiencing this?
My brother's read the book. I've had many discussions with him. He can't recall any experience that was like any of the experiences I've reported in my book. Now, he was a witness to a multiple witness UFO close encounter, where I believe was another abduction event for myself. Now, my father had lifelong sinus infections, sinus headaches, which is a very common report for abductees that, particularly those that have some evidence from regressive hypnosis or from the experiences that they can consciously recall that they've had an implant, they've had a nasal implant. They very commonly report that they've had a history of sinusitis. But my father never told me that he had anything like the experiences I had. I never told anyone in my family until I wrote the book that I had any of these experiences, because I didn't know what they added up to. I as a child, as a young adult, I couldn't explain what happened to them. I knew they were extremely strange. They were very unusual experiences that transcended normal human experience, but I didn't know what the basis of those experiences could be until I read the books that had come out in the 80s. There was a very interesting experience I had that I talked about in a chapter near the end of the book entitled "Stalked in the Suburbs," where I can remember my father telling me, there's a trap door leading to the attic. If you ever need to escape to a safe room, you can use that trap door. And I looked at him like he was crazy. I thought to myself, why would I need to do that? And he never explained why he was telling me this, what the reason might be for me wanting to retreat to a safe room. And I always had the suspicion during the experience of writing the book that he knew more than he was telling me, whether or not he knew what was happening to me or surmised that something strange was happening to me, or he had his own experiences similar to mine when he was a child, is something I can only speculate on. But, I don't have any concrete experiences that were related to me by my family members that would suggest to me that they had the same set of experiences that I had.
I find it interesting that your grandfather had the sinus problem, your dad had the sinus problem, you had the sinus problem.
Very common.
But what are the odds that, from generation to generation, all the males in the family suffer from that?
As far as I know, there's been no studies to show that there's any genetic predisposition to having, sinusitis. We didn't have any other kind of allergies. It does certainly, conform to this model of alien abduction, implantation, using the nasal cavity as a route to insert implants for some type of monitoring of human brain function, either in the sinuses or for placement intrabrain. But as I keep coming back to that, dozens or hundreds of abductees have reported the lifelong sinusitis, and so there is this connection between that type of what would be an expected outcome of having these implant procedures and these unexplained nosebleeds and scars on occasion found inside the nasal cavity that would be consistent with some type of medical intervention.
Have you any scars in your nasal cavity?
Yes, I again, this is the striking thing, that I've had the same set of experiences suggesting I had a nasal implant, along with the memory of.
Oh, and this is from the tonsil.
I had the unexplained nosebleed. I had the ENT at the time of my tonsils and adenoids were removed when I was just after my 7th birthday. Find a scar or wound in the nasal cavity, or in the nasopharynx, in the part of the throat behind the nasal cavity, that he told my father about. And I had a strange account in the book, a very funny account in the book, where just before I went under anesthesia, I can remember telling this surgeon, "Doctor, why didn't I have to have 2 surgeries?" I thought maybe I had to have 2 surgeries because my imagination was that the first surgery removed my adenoids, and the second surgical procedure that he was performing was to remove my tonsils. And he looked at me very strangely and never answered. And I believe during that particular procedure, after I was anesthetized, is when he found the scar, which duplicates the case that was described by Bud Hopkins. Same age, same type of unexplained nosebleeds, same type of scars found in the same part of the body, and within a family where 3 generations had abduction experiences, and there was also a memory. I think the mother had remembered an actual implant procedure on board a UFO. So, but it was a very striking parallel to my own particular set of experiences that I talk about in the book.
What was the next experience you had? What age was that?
So that must have been 3 years later, in 1965. This was, again, nothing to do with sleep paralysis with this. It was in the middle of the day. We were playing a game of kickball, 4-on-4, in our front yard. It was June 19th of 1965. And again, just like the first UFO close encounter I had, near dusk, a cloudless day. And for some reason, I don't know, I was made to turn my head to the right. I was playing defense right at the edge of our property near the road, the end of our driveway. I can see a light. It's such a bright, large light that I could see it through the large oak tree that was obstructing my view of the light. So I was so curious. I had to get a look at it. I didn't tell anyone. I just stopped playing the game and walked toward our front door, past the oak tree to get an unobstructed view. And what I saw in the sky above me amazed me. It looked like it was right on top of us. The configuration was, as I described in the book, just like the biblical star Bethlehem. A huge star with several asymmetric points, but not a point source of light like an airplane, a helicopter, a star or planet. This was literally at least 2.5 times the size of the full moon. And white light, almost too bright to look at. I estimate maybe 500 feet. That's why I refer to it as a close encounter. And at this point, I was the first to see it. When my classmates, including my brother, was part of the kickball game, saw that I had walked to the middle of the front of our lawn, they joined me and we began looking at this object for probably 30 to 60 seconds. And again, as I mentioned to other people that I've reported this account to, the whole scene transitioned to what's known in the abduction literature as the Oz effect. Everything seems to transition to a very a sense of strangeness. There's no sound. All of the ambient noises in the neighborhood of the animals, the insects are gone. Can't hear a sound. Everything seems to slow down. More than that, I got frightened by the fact that I wanted to explore why I couldn't hear anything. I thought maybe I was distracted by the UFO. I turned my head away from it, back toward the house and the forest behind it, just to see if I can hear anything, because the sound of the insects, the grasshoppers and crickets, had been deafening while we're playing our game just a couple minutes before. Couldn't hear a thing. But as I say, I became more frightened because maybe 3 feet to my left was one of the kickball players, a boy with blonde hair. I can't remember his name. He appeared to be frozen. He was not moving, almost as if he was paralyzed or frozen in place. I knew this for a fact because I became very apprehensive and uneasy about this. I didn't want to deal with this. I immediately turned my head away from this because it had frightened me to look back at the UFO. At that point, as if by a flip of a switch, it was gone. As if the light had turned off, but there was something in its place. It was the classic fireball. And there have been many UFO sightings, particularly I talk about in the book in the year of 1965, where there was a large light, white light, made it look like a star, and also either transition or at the same point, the witnesses have reported they also could see at some point during the encounter, the close encounter, a fireball. And that's what we saw. And I think I'm going to end there, just in case there are any questions about this particular incident and UFO close encounter.
Well, I was going to say in the book, one of the little girls made a comment to you that they were looking for you, or that you disappeared for a moment of time.
Well, I did mention that when the Star of Bethlehem light, I call Star of Bethlehem, was silent, motionless, but when it flipped off, as if by flip of a switch, and was replaced by this fireball, I could see almost immediately it was moving. It was moving south. And of course, naturally, I wanted to follow it. I didn't even, I was still frightened by the fact that the boy on my left was not moving. I didn't hear the 6 or 7 people on my right talking at all. I couldn't sense any movement there, but I still, as scared I was by what was going on around me, I still was so curious and fascinated by this UFO. I followed it until I walked next door to our neighbor's property, counted 1001, 1002, just to see how long it took before it disappeared over the horizon. And
you were a smart kid, man. I would have not thought that. Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted to remember every detail about this experience, but probably would never have anything like this experience for the rest of my life. But I knew it didn't change its altitude, its direction, its speed. And it took about 90 seconds, as I said, for it to disappear over the horizon. Nobody followed me next door to our neighbor's property, where, I stopped in the middle of the lawn of their back lawn and watched it. Then I couldn't see it anymore. And at that point, I walked back, and everyone else was still in the middle of our front lawn. And we began to discuss what we had just seen. But what really startled me was this girl that had before blurted out, what is it, when we first saw the bright light, again blurted out something that really startled me, because she said, "Bruce, where did you go?" And I told her, well, I walked next door just to get a better view. She said, "No, I saw you in your neighbor's yard." And so no one else said anything. And I have to say, it's a fact that I didn't really explore this question at the time, but clearly, I when I look back at this, I can't explain why I was not present at that particular sighting at that location where all of us are huddled together looking at the UFO. But I knew I wasn't there for another couple of reasons. One reason is the fact that my best friend from across the street had said, there was like a static discharge or some type of, well, he described it as lightning around the fireball, the red fireball. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was the first to see the UFO, the last to watch it disappear over the horizon. I never saw that. My mother had watched the whole scene from inside through our open door, through the screen door of our front door, and had mentioned that she had seen the classic UFO comprised of 3 lights of different color. I didn't know what she was talking about. I had never seen that or anything like that during this particular sighting. I was just mystified what people were telling me when we were sharing notes about this particular shared experience we had. And now when I look back at that, I can explain the fact that I didn't see a couple of features of this particular UFO that others had seen, by perhaps I had some type of altered state of consciousness. But the fact that the girl said that I was not present tells me that this had nothing to do with an altered state of consciousness. My physical body was missing for a period of time, and there was enough evidence to prove in a court of law that if I was accused of committing a crime in the neighborhood, I would not be able to supply an alibi, because for a period of time I was missing from the scene. I was gone. So again,
Fascinating.
now inferring that I was abducted is also based on the fact that I've had other
abduction experiences.
experiences
You don't have
where
an
I've
actual
seen
memory.
alien human beings, been inside a UFO, had them, actually visit me in my bedroom as a prelude to an abduction, to a waiting UFO, or maybe at the end of an abduction after I was returned. So, in looking at the totality of all my experiences has caused me to infer that that's what happened during this particular sighting. That
But you
was
don't actually
also
remember what
an
happened.
abducted. I don't know if others were involved, but I have a lot of evidence I presented in the book that I certainly was.
And the thing is, there's a lot more to his story that goes on, and I highly encourage everybody to pick up this book. It is available on Amazon. Bruce, I try to leave a comment and a rating on Amazon, but because I'm in Canada, they won't let me.
Oh,
So
wow.
I thought it was really, really stupid, but I give this definitely a 5-star.
Thank you.
I poured over this within a day or two, and I thought
What's the title? A scientist's own.
It's a scientist's own alien abduction encounters. Dominion.
It's called
Lost.
actually Dominion Lost.
Yeah.
Dominion Lost, a scientist's own alien abduction encounters.
If you're just listening to this, I am showing the book right now. But again, it's available on Amazon for anybody to pick up, and definitely do so. It does support the author as well, and as promoting the book to others to pick up. What's fascinating, Michael, is that we've had people from the 60s and 70s that have had experiences in the 60s and 70s now stepping forward and saying, wait a minute, I'm a whistleblower on the experience factor. And we're seeing that more and more with more credibility. There's more background checks done on these people, and they turn out to be more credible than the military or the CIA guys, because those guys could always be operatives.
You don't have conflicts or potential conflicts of interest professionally with the person who's a medical doctor.
And in all honesty, who puts themselves out there, and say, hey, I've had these experiences? Because like Bruce, you mentioned most of your family's hearing about this for the first time. Susan Alloway, a lot of the podcasts we did with her, just the first time her family hears of it. So people are coming forward, but they're reaching out to the community, which is great, because we need to be there and support people, experiencers. But also there's a factor of talking to the family about it, saying, look, if this isn't happening to you, it's definitely happening to me. And Bruce, my man, you are far from being an idiot based on your PhDs and everything that you've done, your papers. You are a very intelligent person. So, when you're telling me that this is happening to you, the credibility for me is there, because you've proven that you're smart, you're intelligent, you're analytical, you're looking at the circumstances of this and trying to, we try to make it fit the narrative or our understanding of things, but our species is limited. Our dimension that we inhabit is limited. And this opens up, for me, I'm excited. I'm giddy. It's like a kid. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like, the next phase of exploration might be in different dimensions. That's crazy. Or space. Maybe our future's in both. But either way, there's an interactions with entities that are not human with our species. And it starts at an early age. And I'm just curious, when's the last time you've had an experience, you think, Bruce?
In my adult life, I had early adult life, I had a number of dreams where I was flying, and it felt incredibly real. I think, since other people have had these same types of dreams, it might have been when I was being lifted up into the UFO, because in every one of these dreams, I can see the same beings that I've seen a number of times on either side of me, flying with me. The only thing I can recall is that a number of times in my later adult life is I can remember being woken up by a tap on the forehead. And this clearly felt like several fingers of a hand had hit me on the forehead, and I woke up. Incredibly real. One person I told this to said they were trying to find out if you were okay after the abduction and the experimentation had been complete, and whether or not you were still, with us. And but other than that, I have, all of the experiences that I talk about in the book. Some of the experiences I've had as like one I just mentioned, I did not include in the book. But what I want to point out is that a number of those experiences occurred before the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, before any of this was in the popular culture.
Mm-hmm.
No one had even heard the word gray alien at the time. I and others, Betty and Andreasen, you might know the Raymond Fowler books about the Andreasen affair, and quite a number of abductees, report experiences before any of this was being talked about in the movies and books and television. So I don't know how this can be attributed to imagination. If that's the case, then many people, hundreds and thousands of people, were having the same dreams, and I don't know how that can happen.
Yeah,
so that's what I'm going to leave you with.
Yeah, and even so, I'm not sure that the dream hypothesis makes a lot of sense, given how we don't have a lot of evidence that people regularly mistake, dreams for reality to such a degree. I mean,
Good point.
Just be confined to this particular kind of experience that we say, oh, you think this really bizarre, ontologically shocking thing happened to you. Oh, it was just a dream. People don't claim to have actually like encountered dragons in reality, and it turns out to have been just a dream or something. It just seems to be abduction experiences or encounters with these kinds of beings.
And so many people, many abductees have had the experiences during the daytime when they're driving in a car. And also, the other thing I want to mention is that many also have the same experiences. They can, like myself, consciously recall them. None of the experiences reported about in the book were retrieved through regressive hypnosis. All of them I could consciously remember. And that's kind of a misnomer that when people think about the topic of alien abduction, many people seem to think that, well, these are people that have all been hypnotized, and that's why they think they've been abducted. But that's not the case. That's a significant percentage. That's not even close to the total percentage of people that claim abduction. Many of them can, like myself, can remember.
I think the overwhelming majority of them haven't gone through, regression or
right. A lot of people have not.
Yeah, and even recently I saw a Joe Rogan episode, and he said, "Well, it's always the same thing. Somebody's sleeping, and then they wake up." And I'm like, "No, I was actually angry at that part, because there's probably more people being abducted while they're awake than the ones that are asleep." And why is it that the ones that are asleep have the exact same experience and events happen as the ones who are awake and fully experiencing this? And again, it's a mental illness that is undiscovered, unnoticed, and nobody's ever looked into it before, that people worldwide are experiencing by the millions, or it's actually happening. And I think it's actually happening. I think that even the probe that they put in your nose, I mean, it's between your eyes and your brain. The eyes are part of the brain. So to me, it's like they're watching what you're watching. They're monitoring what you're thinking, or, there's got to be a purpose to these implants. And it's why at a young age, why at 6, there's age factors too, because usually by 13, the experiences are no longer so much medical in the nose, but now they take place in the genital area. They take sudden interest in your sperm production or ovaries if you're a woman. And the nature of the abduction changes throughout life. And some people we talk to, later on in life have an enlightenment that happens to them that said, no, wait a minute, I see this as a good thing. Whereas before, throughout their entire life, it's terrifying and you can't talk about it. Who are you going to call? Who are you going to talk to? Right? Nobody's going to believe you. It's so far out there, that, and it's just not in the paradigm. It's just not in our world that we could comprehend. We're starting to now. And I think, the slogan of our podcast is, are you paying attention? Because if you are, you're picking up on the details that are repeating. And again, the whole nighttime abduction, if they're working 24/7, they know what cycle you're at around the sun. They know that it's 3 a.m. or, the witching hours between 11 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. That's a witching hour. That seems to be the most, the time to come the most for people. But if you know that everybody's asleep and you're trying to minimize the amount of people that are going to see you doing what you do, you go at that time, right? And it just makes sense. And you just follow that around the globe, worldwide. And it's a full-time operation, 24/7. And that's what's interesting. It's not just a one-off, every 10 years something happens. It's daily. And that's the point that we have to now address.
It's funny how you said that. You keep saying it's a 24/7. That's the impression I had as a 6-year-old when I sat up on the examination table, and I looked at these beings, and they looked like they never took any vacation. Very, and
they
if
look
that's
tired.
the case, we have to start. We have to work a little bit harder to figure this all out, because
they have bags under
they look
their
like
eyes.
they had a serious of purpose. And they're I don't know, maybe they're trying to get to everyone on our planet.
Gray lives matter, right? Gray lives matter. We're going to make a shirt that says that.
Yes, I definitely like that.
Yeah, that'd be something to wear at the convention, Michael. Gray lives matter.
I think it would catch on. Bruce, I have so many more questions for you. I think we should do a part 2, because I want to know about the professional consequences that you've contemplated for coming out in the story, how it's affected your sort of general worldview, and others, lots of other stories in your book that we didn't have any time to get to. So
I'd love to. Now, I just wanted to mention before I forget that Jason touched on something regarding the fact that something's got to be going on when so many people report implants. There must be a purpose to them. And let me mention that, I have 2 books. The book you have in front of you, Jason, was a book that is not interrupted by a lot of scientific analysis, because I wanted the reader to get the biggest impact and perhaps the best reading experience from my personal experiences. However, I have an unabridged version, which is a couple hundred pages longer, which deals with a lot of scientific analysis, especially with respect to what the implants are, what their purpose is. I imagine them to be brain-computer interfaces that are used to catalog human mental activity, learn how the human nervous system works, perhaps with the purpose of controlling us and manipulating human society by controlling the human mind. And a number of chapters talk about what the implants are made of, what type of energy they use to project energy into the brain, perhaps to control the human mind, and how they work. And
how do I get a copy of that book?
That if you can just, if you like a printed copy, just send me your mailing address and I'll send you one.
Oh, sure.
Or an ebook.
I would totally accept that. But like, also, how if I were a listener and I wanted that particular copy, do I search for something different on Amazon?
Just search Bruce Rapuano or Dominion Lost, the scientist's own alien abduction encounters, and the unabridged book that has so much discussion about what the implants are, what I think they are, how they might work, is it shows a little boy being beamed up into a UFO.
Okay. So I just search for unabridged, and I can
just search for unabridged, and you'll be able to get the book with much more scientific analysis. And but you know, because people have different goals in reading these books. I'm sure a lot of people, after reading the abridged book, might have some interest in some of the science, and they can go back and look at the unabridged book at some point.
I
But
think also, Bruce, at some point, if you're not already, definitely look into the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies.
yes,
I think
yes.
with your credentials, your experience, that would be huge.
Yeah, we love it.
Well, you're
Yeah.
a member of that, aren't you, Michael?
Michael
I am.
is, yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about that. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
can
know.
look
They
more later.
because they publish papers,
Yeah, we can
And-
publish white papers.
scientific
Yeah,
papers.
a lot of them are experiencers.
I've
A lot
looked
of
at
them are
some of them.
experiencers.
Yeah, I was happy to see that. Very happy to see that.
I was
Well-
actually looking at a paper recently that about a proposed propulsion mechanism that made me think about some of the experiences you were talking about, because it mentioned how this particular propulsion mechanism would change like the refractive index of the air.
Was it Hal
and-
Puthoff's paper?
No. This is
No,
this
somebody else. Somebody
it's
else.
actually just circulation, so I don't even know if they'd want me talking about it. But I doubt it's people. Yeah, I didn't recognize the names. They're like aerospace industry people. But some of the effects that you mentioned about like the silencing of ambient noise and the differences in visual experiences that people at different places would have sort of aligns with some of the.
I have a chapter in my book about how a gravity drive might work in the unabridged version, if you're interested. Anyone's
Yeah.
interested.
Totally interesting.
I talk a lot about Bob Lazar's story and my take on it. George Knapp thought it was a very interesting section of the book,
Oh, interesting.
in the large book.
I'm a huge Bob Lazar fan, so you know,
I'm a total skeptic. but-
yeah,
Oh, it's
but that's
cool.
good.
Really?
That's good. Yeah, yeah.
That's
I
that's
think
cool. You
there's
both
a balance there. You keep me
you-
humble,
you,
right?
you both have completely different opinions on it. That's cool.
Yeah, but it's different. I mean, everybody's experience is different. That's what I
Right,
love about this
right.
subject, and talking to people like yourself, Bruce, and you know, even having Michael on every time is just we learn, and it allows us to gather more information, understand it a little bit more, however we can understand it, and see if we could find, you know, the common denominators amongst the abductees or experiencers. Like there's people that are not being taken, but they see them, you know, they see them on the regular, whether they work for the military. You got to think about how many military personnel have seen or encountered these things, being told they had to engage or go this, go get it. We know at least 100 years or nearing 100 years that the U.S. has been doing this as a new country. So you got to think the older countries probably been at it for a bit longer.
Mhm.
But Bruce, we're definitely going to have you on again and talk about this. I was fascinated by your story. And like I said, I poured over the books within 2 days of studying it, highlighting everything. And it's very sound. And like I said, your background and understanding how things work scientifically and try to put personal things that are happening to you that don't really fit in the scientific, like you can't reproduce those experiments. It's a one time. And what did that do to an individual? Psychologically, what does that do to you? Because you're taking basically life is like a play. And every once in a while you see behind the stage and you see the stage hands, right? And then you put you back on stage. Everybody in the play doesn't know, but you do, right? So that's what I see this phenomenon as, is that there's certain people that are privy to this. I think you're one of
You're
them.
behind the curtain. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know whether it's good, bad, neutral. I don't know what the purpose is, but the fact is that they bring you back every time, relatively unscathed, right? So
Right.
to me, that doesn't seem to be malicious in any way. It's not like they just drop you in your front lawn, you know, when they're done with you, they actually bring you back. So
Well, accidents can happen, and as I point out, in the book,
Grandfather might be an example.
he may not be might have been the only, he may not have been the only one.
yeah, I
So
think there's been a lot of
some,
deaths related
some
to this. for sure.
medical adverse consequences.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad that you made it back, Bruce, because you've been a delightful guest, and
Thank you.
we look forward to having you again. As a tradition, I always ask the last question as what are the books that you would push into the hands of the audience that would help them understand the phenomena the way you do?
The books that caused me to reevaluate my entire life and what had happened to me, and that they would include anything written by Bud Hopkins, Missing Time, Intruders, David Jacobs, Secret Life, The Threat. Whitley Strieber's books, particularly Transformation, where he does some scientific analysis of his own experiences and experiences of other abductees. And of course, last but not least, the late Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, wrote Abducted. And, these are the three of the deans of abduction investigators that I think anyone who's just starting out to trying to understand this phenomenon, I think should consult first.
Wonderful. Thank you for those
classics.
Yes.
Yeah. And John Mack,
Absolutely.
yeah, that was my first introduction to the abduction phenomenon, was reading his book when I was a kid. But again, it was people like yourself, scientists, lawyers, doctors. And I was amazed because I was expecting it was going to be, a slack-jawed yokel from, who knows where, saying he saw something or something happened to him. But it's legit people. And that's where it gives it credibility. It's like, okay, either if we look up to you as a scientist, but then discredit anything that you experience in your life, that doesn't make any sense, right? So
I want to pick up on what you said about John Mack, because I remember that the Harvard administration had criticized his work for not being sufficiently scholarly, and I was always in the back of my mind in writing this book. I thought, I'm going to err on the side of having as much scientific analysis as I can, because I didn't want to be, especially when I'm talking about my own experiences, my own personal experiences. I didn't want to be subject to that criticism. So I did as much as I could to try to, as a scientist, from my perspective, try to explain what I think happened to me. So that's my rationale for why I wrote the books the way I did.
Well, we encourage everybody to go check out that book. Yeah, absolutely.
And any other scientist out there that is experiencing something like this, reach out, right? Yeah. Contact Bruce or contact us. We'll send you the right information, the right people. But if you've had something similar like this, speak up. The more voices we have to put towards this, the more information.
That's one of my goals. That's one of my goals in writing the book.
Exactly.
I think I can speak for everybody and say that if you do contact any of us, we guarantee you the degree of anonymity that you'd like to maintain. So we know that there are sort of worries about professional consequences and things, but we all take this very seriously. So we encourage everybody to reach out and speak up.
Teamwork to make the dream work, baby. Awesome.
I can second that. I can definitely second that. Thank you.
Exactly. And Michael, I think we only got a few interviews booked. I'm still booking about 2 for us, but I think we only got about 2-3 interviews before we end up in California. And over there, obviously, we're going to be doing a bunch of videos, whatever. Take pictures with everybody. But I look forward to that, of course. And for everybody that's out there, please support Bruce Rapuano. His book is called Dominion Lost. Again, you could find that on Amazon. And if you're podcasters out there and you want to interview Bruce and you need his contact information, if you can't find it, contact us. We'll let you know. We want Bruce to be out there and promoting this as much as possible.
Attention.